a mysterious artifact that was found early in the 20th century in the area that is known today as Iraq. This artifact was found, and they call it a prism, but it's a four-sided prism in cuneiform. If any of you can read cuneiform, it is called the Mysterious King's List. How many of you are familiar with it? You're familiar with it. So it is mysterious because it is a chronological list of rulers on the earth before the Great Flood. And you'll see this in a moment. As a geologist, I can confirm there was a Great Flood. It happened at the end of the Ice Age when the ice melted. The melting water flooded a large part of the earth. So there was a Great Flood. And then the King's List continues after the Great Flood. Here's the mystery, the great mystery. What we know is that the listing of the names and the ages of the kings is 100% accurate after the flood. The ages that they lived, the years they lived, the ages they were when they died, 100% accurate. Before the flood is where the mystery comes in, because the lifespans are in terms of spans of time that we cannot fathom for a single lifetime. And the question, the mystery is, if the artifact is accurate after the flood, why would it be flawed before? Or is it accurate before, and it's telling us something about ourselves? So, you want to take a look at this? Are you okay if we check this out? It's pretty amazing. It was discovered in what now is modern-day Iraq. Between 1900 and 1906, fragments were found. And I wanted to say this to you. After 1906, 18 additional fragments were discovered. And I'm saying that because it's not a one-off. It's not like somebody had a fantasy and did this. 18 other records existed to corroborate the original one. So this was a very well-documented list of ancient rulers. It identifies 8 rulers of ancient Sumer, the name that was given to Iraq. Now listen to this. Listen to where this goes. 8 rulers, their combined rule lasted 241,000 years before the flood. So even if you don't have your calculator, 8 rulers, 241,000 years, we're talking about some long lifetimes. The longest single rule was measured in what we call a SAR, S-A-R. The longest rule was 12 SARs in length. Anybody know how long a SAR is? So you're going to learn something. If you didn't learn anything else, you learned a brand new fact today. A SAR is scientifically validated and accepted, and no question about this. A SAR is 3,600 years in length. One ruler lived 12 SARs. All right? The longest rule was 43,200 years. Now think about this. All of the ages and the times are 100% accurate after the flood. Why would they be flawed before the flood, or is it telling us something? And I want you to actually see. These are translations. So here is, I don't know if you can see on your monitors up there. This is the name of one of the rulers, Imin Luana, 12 stars, 432,000 years. And then, I'll highlight this so you can see it. Right here on the text, it says, then the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, so you're actually seeing a translation from what's on the obelisk there, and the kingship had descended from heaven. The kingship was in Kish. Kish was the name of ancient Sumer. That's what it used to be called. So the rulers, according to this document, descended from another realm, and it's in that realm apparently where their longevity was very different from the longevity that we have here. So the question is it fact or fiction? Is this like a story that somebody made up? You know, what's going on here? Well, as a geologist, this is what I was mentioning. I can tell you the history of the Earth from the ancient ice cores in Antarctica and Greenland. We have a very accurate record of Earth's history. Includes climate change, the whole story recorded in these ice cores of climate change. It's very different from the story that we're being indoctrinated to accept in the world today. The difference is this is based on science, not politics. So if you are interested in more of that, I've got an entire Gaia series you can see, or I'm happy to talk to you about it another time, maybe in a Q&A or something. But we can learn a lot from the history. This is Earth revealing her history without politics, without corporate interests, without religious interests. This is Earth just telling us her story. And her story is there was a flood. And we know there was a great flood. The flood resulted from the Earth warming, global warming, melting the ice. It happened about 17,000 years before present. Interestingly, Kish in Mesopotamia was founded just about 17,000 years before present, 16,780 years before present. So Kish was there just before and existed during the time that the ice was melting. So we know that's accurate. We know the flood happened. The ages after the flood, the ages of people began to decline after the flood. So the ages range from 140 years of age to 1,500 years of age. And this is where biblical history comes in. If you've ever studied the patriarchs, so Adam is said to have lived to 930 Earth years. Noah, 950. I love the story of Noah because Noah was 600 years old. 600 years old when the flood happened. And he built the boat that saved people and animals. And after the flood, he must have still been in pretty good shape because he started a new family at 600 years old. So I have friends that are in their 60s that are saying, well, getting older, things don't work like they used to. Yeah, well, that's why I don't want to go to my class reunion. No. So the ages of the patriarchs before the flood, this is what they were. 950 years for Noah. Adam was 930. Enoch was 905. He was 365, Enoch, but he didn't die. He left. There's a whole story behind Enoch. But look at this. After the flood, the ages declined, and you begin to see the biblical patriarchs from living from 600 years down to only about 175 years. So what you're seeing here is a chronology that looks outrageous to us. We have something that we know is true on here, and that is the flood. The flood happened. We know that the ages of the patriarchs on this document match the ages that we have revealed through historic past before. What we don't know is what about those outrageous ages of the ones that came before? Could they have possibly lived in one body for that length of time? Now, there's a lot of controversy around this. We don't know specifically the answer, but here's the question. Is the chronology of the kings before the flood accurate? And is the list a record of some rare, extreme example of longevity, or is it a reminder to us of our lost potential to heal in ways that we're only beginning to understand for extended lifetimes compared to what we have now?
A female relative of Albert Perry, an African-American man from South Carolina, submitted a sample of his DNA to a company called Family Tree to trace family roots. During the routine DNA analysis, technicians at the genetic testing company made an extremely rare discovery. Albert Perry contained a Y chromosome with a genetic signature like no other. Y chromosomes are the hereditary factor determining the male sex. Albert Perry revealed that the most recent common ancestor for his lineage was roaming the earth about 338,000 years ago. geneticists have been able to prove that all men tested thus far in these commercial databases can trace their Y chromosome to a common male ancestor labeled Adam that lived between 60,000 and 140,000 years ago. This made his DNA over twice as old as any fossil on record for Homo sapiens. Now scientists are questioning everything that is known about the time and location of the first people on Earth. Is this finally the proof pre-Adamite theorists have been looking for? If Albert Perry's Y chromosome predates this by hundreds of thousands of years, what are the implications? Is it possible there was an earlier human population that became extinct? An incredible artifact that has been a topic of great controversy among historians and scholars trying to get to the bottom of this mystery is a King's List found in the Sumerian cuneiforms.
The King Lists go back 266,000 years. Now that's kind of interesting because modern scientists believe that the first humans like us came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. And they believe that the first civilizations where you would have kings in urban areas and social organization, they believe that all started 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. So to have these Sumerian king lists going back 266,000 years is really amazing.
If humans have been around for close to 300,000 years, according to Albert Perry's DNA test, why do all these creation stories come from a much later time? And even more odd, why do we hold on to the truths that were given to us by these gods? Researcher and historian Anton Parks has a disturbing theory about this.
Que les fameux dieux sumériens auraient créé l'Homo sapiens vers 300.
You have to know that when the gods arrived on Earth, according to what the tablets state, they reigned over the Earth for thousands of years. Elements of the story are in the Zohar, the Nag Hammadi text as well, which basically tell the same story, and the same version as the Sumerian one to enslave mankind. Human beings must behave, not think too much, and most of all, not see that there is another reality to what is said. In the texts of Eden, there is a curious scene. It describes humans specially created to work in the garden, but at some point, in order to enforce their laws, the gods place the humans in front of them. Behind the gods is their shiny chariot. That is how it is written. And they make them pledge allegiance. It is fascinating. They impose their views upon mankind. They want to scare them. And sadly, through this oath to which humanity commits, humans forbid themselves to ever be free. I personally think that to this day, we are still under the influence of this oath. It is crucial to understand that. In concrete terms, we are still slaves.
We've never been free from the manipulation of beings on the outside. And that the sad irony in history is the humans have gotten down on their knees to things standing in front of them that had the name God, and they were never gods.
If the lifespan of our early kings was 36,000 years, it appears something in our evolution changed 12,500 years ago. In the book of Genesis, God said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years." Did human lives get shortened at some point? The longest known human lifespan that modern scientists have on record, a woman who died in the French countryside in 1997, was 122. Since then, there has been significant debate about whether modern man has reached the upper limits of our longevity.
Methuselah in the scriptures lived a long time. We have these stories. Did God intervene and change our DNA so now we only get 125 years or 150 years or some shorter period? If so, why? Would there be any way to find this, to get this back? Or is it working on some other level Do we have longer or shorter lives in a spiritual sense, in a psychological sense, in an emotional sense? Has the rush of modern life shortened our lived experience, and there is some way to gain the enormity, the expanse of time that we once knew?
Anton Park suggests that there is information that points to certain bloodlines.
Dans les livres, certains livres, que certains d'ailleurs intitulent conspirationnistes, il est...
When you start looking at these subjects, whether it is on the web or in some books that people qualify as possibly conspiracy books, it is often spoken of a genetic lineage, reptilian, and of royal blood. I do think that some royal bloodlines still exist nowadays that come from the Anunnas, specifically the lineage of Enlil, Ninurta, and An.
Could these descendants of royal bloodlines be able to see beyond the current reality in order to control it? Reporter Linda Howe has an interesting theory on the origins of the term blue blood.
One friend and colleague of mine was Lawrence Gardner. He was tracking the whole significance of certain bloodlines going back into Mesopotamia. I was encountering exactly the same information coming in to my investigations of an alien presence on this planet and throughout the solar system. We found that we met at sort of a same point, and that was that in Mesopotamia, that all of the Anunnaki were supposed to be reptilian. And that the reptilian biology had blood that was dominated by copper. And that they literally had blue colored blood. We have red because we have an iron dominant blood. So our discussion from his history and my trying to get into it through aliens that have been dominating the earth was that the blue blood reptilians of Mesopotamia led to a group called the Merovingians. And the Merovingians tie later in the timeline directly to France, Germany, and that area of Europe, because for some reason, that bloodline, the blue bloods, went to Europe. Lawrence Gardner and other people's work coming through royalty, blue blood, tie this connection between the reptilians, Merovingians in Mesopotamia, and they were literally a reptilian blue blood line.
Anton Parks explains how his studies of several ancient texts reveal similar stories about humankind surrendering their will to Sumerian gods, but that in the end we choose to kneel.
Donc, moi, je pense qu'on est toujours sous l'influence de ce serment que l'humanité...
I think that we are still under the influence of the oath sworn by humanity in front of the gods and their chariot. At this particular point, humanity forbade itself from ever knowing freedom and from thinking freely. They more or less enslaved themselves. We are still under the oath that the human race swore to the Sumerian gods in front of their spaceship. I think that there are several ways of breaking this type of oath. First of all, by acknowledging it, by allowing oneself, and by saying it out loud. I am not anymore under the oath that was sworn to the Anunnas. And this works for any oath. From the moment when you know you have sworn an oath in this life or in a previous one, you can actually liberate yourself, quite simply.
Sitchin famously reinterpreted ancient Sumerian texts that he claimed told of extraterrestrials called Annunaki, or Shining Ones, who came to Earth from a mysterious, previously unknown planet X, hundreds of thousands of years ago. Their base of operations was Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq. Buried beneath the sands of Iraq are the secrets of these Shining Ones. And according to Bible prophecy, the city of Babylon is destroyed near the end of the age. This means it must be rebuilt. Saddam Hussein spent over $500 million during the 1980s on the reconstruction and reestablishment of Babylon in fulfillment of that prophecy. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. He looted its treasure, including the Ark of the Covenant. He also took 10,000 Jews from Jerusalem and held them captive in Babylon. He needed the wise men of the Temple of Solomon to make a golden gadget that opened a fiery furnace. 3 of these wise men entered the fiery furnace and came back with the Son of God, as in Jesus, in tow, suggesting that this was actually some kind of a portal. I want to talk about what the Jews learned while they were in Babylon. During their 70 years in Babylon, between 586 BC and 516 BC, the exiled Jewish people, including the ascension prophets Ezekiel and Daniel, came into contact with the Zoroastrians from Iran, among other learned scholars, and they learned many new doctrines from them. Zoroastrianism was founded by Zarathustra Spinaman of Central Asia. He was the first messenger of the wise supreme being known as Ahura Mazda. The Greeks called him Zorro, meaning shining, Aster, meaning star. And foremost among his teachings is the idea of bodily resurrection and ascension. Before their exile in Babylon, the Jews did not believe in heaven or hell or in the resurrection of the body or soul. They believed that once you died or were dead, your soul goes to Sheol, meaning the prison house, and that was the end of existence. But while they were in Babylon, the Zoroastrians and the ancient Babylonians taught them about paradise and about a final judgment of all souls and about the resurrection into new bodies of light. When the Jews arrived in Babylon, they were greeted by the fabulous sight of the Esagila, the lofty house. This ziggurat was dedicated to the Mesopotamian god Marduk, who is portrayed wearing a robe covered with stars. He was a celestial being. Also called the house that lifts its head high, the Esagila was his place of ascension. This great ziggurat, meaning rising building or temple tower of Babylon, was equivalent to the step pyramid or stairway to heaven in Saqqara, Egypt. The description of Marduk's second temple, the Annunaki, provided the Greek researcher Herodotus in his book, The Histories, astonishing details about the temple ritual and its purpose. The temple of Bel, he said, the Babylonian Zeus, was still in existence in my time, wrote Herodotus. It has a solid central tower, 1 stadium square, with a second erected on top of it, and then a third, and so on up to 8. All 8 towers can be climbed by a spiral way running round the outside, and about halfway up there are seats for those who make the ascent to rest on. On the summit of the topmost tower stands a great temple with a fine large couch in it, richly covered, and a golden table beside it. The shrine contains no image, and no one spends the night in there except one Babylonian woman, all alone, who, however, it may be that the god has chosen her for a specific reason. The Chaldeans say, though Herodotus didn't believe them, that the god, Marduk himself, enters the temple in person and takes his rest upon the bed. What Herodotus had a hard time believing is the idea that Marduk, a celestial being, a god, manifests as a human in his temple. Not only that, but his intention is to disrobe and lay with the human female of his choice. The ziggurat is a cosmic pole, a ladder, or a mountain that leads to heaven, where the gods Marduk, Shamash, Adad, and others dwell at the throne of the supreme god, whose name is Anu. Today, we call such a place a stargate. This Annunaki ascension tower of ancient Babylon served as the backdrop for one of the greatest spiritual and literary revolutions the world has ever seen. It began when the Jewish mystics returned to Jerusalem during the 4th century BC and came into contact with these teachings. These teachings came into fruition at the time of Jesus, who is shown ascending from a spiraling mountain that highly resembles the bell tower of Babylon. We see Jesus entering the portal of the sun and becoming one with all that is. Avatars, such as Apollonius of Tyana, a student of Pythagoras, who was born into the same world as Jesus and whose miraculous feats have been compared to him, began to teach ascension to the throne of God as a practical reality. Assuredly, many more we have never heard of attempted this great feat. One secret of boundary crossing was that by reciting the stories of the visionary ascents of past ascenders, one could repeat the visionary ascent of the past ascenders. Dr. Himmelfarb tells us that simply reading about the ascension in these texts is powerful in and of itself. The stories are visualizations and mind maps. This is more than just a thought experiment. As one thinks about it and visualizes or replicates their ascension in their mind, one begins to live their ascension in advance. A whole body of Jewish and Christian literature called Merkaba mysticism emerged at this time and comprises what may be thought of as flight simulation training manuals or boundary crossing for the ascent of the soul manuals, manuals that teach us how to ascend to the divine throne, traveling through the halls or holes of space on our soul's winged ring. One thing is clear. These secrets appear to have originated with the Anunnaki. And a lot of people don't know this because they've been distracted in a way by Sitchin's theory that the Anunnaki came here not to teach us ascension, but in search of some mysterious blue stones and gold to repair the decaying atmosphere of their home planet, and that they created humans as a slave race to do this work for them. While Sitchin's theory is not supported by the Sumerian texts, which say nothing about the Anunnaki coming to Earth for gold, virtually all open-minded historical and theological scholars do agree that the Old Testament's book of Genesis was extracted from older Sumerian records, the stories of the Anunnaki. For me, the story of them, the Anunnaki coming to Earth to mine gold, just didn't add up. It didn't make sense to me that these advanced beings would come clear across the solar system just for gold and those mysterious blue stones. I know that gold is a rare commodity in the universe, but the Anunnaki are supposed to have been at least the level of technological advancement that we are today. And we're less than 100 years from warp drives a la Star Trek and nanofabrication. But the Anunnaki had to come here in rocket ships to create a slave race to mine gold? Didn't believe that. What triggered my doubt was Sitchin's assertion that Enki, the god who retooled our DNA, was also an alchemist. And alchemists, we know, endeavor to turn base metals into gold. So why didn't Enki simply grab a hunk of space rock and transmute it? It's important to note that in Sitchin's theory, the pretext of the arrival of the Anunnaki was a cosmic cataclysm. Two planets, one called Tiamat, the other called An or Nibiru, but referred to as Planet X, collided, leaving one of these planets shattered. As a result of this confrontation, Tiamat was split in two. One half of Tiamat became the asteroid belt. The other half became Earth. By splitting or dividing Tiamat in two, this marauding planet released an ocean of blood into the cosmos. But blood is lifeless without soul. So what if Tiamat also released souls into the cosmos?
I made the mistake of my lifetime more than 30 years ago of writing this book, The 12th Planet. By the way, we have made some posters replicating this original cover, and I autographed them, so they are available here. But before that, I made another mistake much earlier, when I was just a schoolboy, fortunate, and I am stressing the word fortunate, to study the Bible, some call it the Old Testament, in its original Hebrew language, and we reached chapter 6 of Genesis, and it's the story about the events leading to the flood, the deluge. And I raised my hand and asked the teacher, why is the word in one of the first sentences of chapter 6 of Genesis, why is it translated giants? There were giants upon the earth in those days and thereafter too. Because the Hebrew word is Nephilim, coming from the root Naphol, which means to descend, to come down, in context from heaven to earth. And I was expecting the teacher to compliment me and say, Sitchin, very good, you know your Hebrew. And instead, I was very harshly reprimanded for questioning the Bible. But I was not questioning the Bible, on the contrary, I was trying to point out the need to understand exactly what it says. So this became an obsession with me. What did the Bible mean by this word, Nephilim? Who were they? Why are they described by so many interpreters of the Bible as giants? And this led me eventually to mythology, and then to the origins of mythology, the Sumerians, and I ended up writing this book, The 12th Planet. Now, when somebody mentions this book, usually the comments are limited to, well, it's a book about the Annunaki who came from another planet called Nibiru, etc. But actually, in the more than 350 pages of that book and more than 120 illustrations, I did much more than just talk about another planet and advanced beings who came from it. I, for example, gave the date based on the Sumerian tablets of when we, not only how, which is given in detail, but when we, Homo sapiens, were brought about. And I said, and if people have their book, The 12th Planet, they can see that I said 300,000 years ago. And lo and behold, on the way from New York, where I live, to Los Angeles now, I opened the New York Times, and there is a report there about a successful deciphering of the Neanderthal genome, and among other things, it mentions there that it's now definitely established that Homo sapiens suddenly appeared 300,000 years ago. And I said that, thank you. And I said that back in the book when it was published, 1976. I, for example, said that Mars was a way station. That Annunaki had a station, a way station, stayed on Mars. And at that time, Mars was deemed to be airless and waterless and totally uninhabitable. And now, of course, we know differently. So in many areas where I relied on the Sumerian tablets, on ancient knowledge, but understanding it in light of our modern science. So there's absolutely no conflict between science and Bible and those ancient Sumerian tablets. So back to the reason for this gathering, the 2012 problem. Now, the first thing I'd like to remind the audience is that there have been other instances of great expectations, good or bad, about it's going to happen. Something is going to happen. It was, if you remember, the millennium, the year 2000, it was supposed to be the predicted time. And when people asked me then, what will happen in 2000, I said, after 2000 will come 2001. And that's basically what happened. Then there was, for reasons that I cannot fathom, a whole excitement about 2003 and the planet that I discussed in my book is sometimes referred as Planet X, the 10th planet, which is the 12th member of the solar system. So it's Planet X, which means the 10th and the unknown. And so in 2003, there was a whole expectation that this planet is on its way back and it's going to cause havoc. And at that time, I think it was not Patagonia, but Costa Rica that was the favored refuge. And nothing happened in 2003. So now the excitement is about Planet X returning and doing whatever it will do in 2012. And this is related to so-called Mayan prophecies. Now, I have devoted a lot of time, as a matter of fact, one of my books, The Lost Realms, deals only with the Americas, North America, Mesoamerica, and South America, and I've studied as much as I could about the Mayas and the Aztecs and the Incas and so on. And I've not come across anything that comes even close to Mayan prophecies. There are a few codexes, so-called codexes, which is like folded pages, and there are no such predictions, but I don't claim to know everything, and some people do believe that something predictable or unpredictable will happen in 2012, and that is based on Mayan astronomy. Their astronomers were very sophisticated, and that's what they predicted. So here are some, on this slide, some examples from Mayan codexes of their astronomers at work. These are 3 or 4 examples of Mayan astronomers looking or scanning the heavens. And I don't think it looks too advanced, at least to me. Now, what the Mesoamerican peoples did have is a calendar. And as a matter of fact, they had 3 calendars, not just one. One calendar, which is known as the long count, counted the passage of time this way, and then there were 2 other calendars that were intermeshed in some way, which I will explain. One was called the Tzolkin, that counted the day-by-day passage of time, and another one that counted it differently. So there were 3 calendars in Mesoamerica, but the main one, which is called the long count, was really not a Mayan calendar at all. In Mesoamerica, which is Mexico and Guatemala, and that part of the New World, there were actually 3 basic cultures or civilizations, certainly when the Spaniards arrived. One was centered more or less here, which was called that one of the Olmecs. The Mayas were here, mostly in Yucatan, and the Aztecs were here, more in central Mexico. Now, the Olmecs, who were the oldest and are considered the mother civilization of Mesoamerica, left behind, and that's how people, archaeologists, came to know about them, they left behind quite a number, I think by now about 20 or so have been discovered, colossal stone heads carved to look presumably like they're chieftains, and there's no doubt that they all look like people from Africa. As a matter of fact, when the first ones were discovered, the Mexican archaeologists tried not to report it or to play it down because it was quite embarrassing to them. How come that the earliest civilization of Mesoamerica, before the Aztecs and before the Mayas, were black Africans? But this is the fact. And now there are quite a number of museums, especially one if you go to Mexico, I recommend that you visit it. It is in a town called Jalapa, devoted exclusively to the Olmec civilization. And among the exhibits, curiously enough, there are toys of Olmec children. And as you can see, some of them had wheels. While, as you know, every respected scholar and archaeologist will tell you that the wheel was totally unknown in the Americas. So this was discovered in the Americas, in Mexico. Another interesting discovery was of this toy, which to me looks like an elephant. And there are no elephants in the Americas. So obviously the Olmecs who made toys for their children remembered what they remembered from wherever they came, from Africa. And in Africa there were a number of civilizations, and the earliest one of them was the Nile civilization, later known as Egypt, but it was Nubia and other countries. Now, I must tell you that if you go to Jalapa, you will neither see the wheel toys, and you will neither see this elephant toy, because when I reported that on my website, the people who read my books went there, and these exhibits were removed for all kinds of excuses. Now the Olmecs depicted the god who brought them over from Africa. They called him Quetzalcoatl, which meant the winged serpent. Some say the plumed serpent, but I prefer the winged. And that's how he looked. This is not a carving by Sitchin. This is an Olmec carving. And you can see that this is somebody definitely bearded. And one feature distinguishing people in Mesoamerica is that they don't have facial hair. So this again is someone not from Mesoamerica, not from the Americas at all. That's how he looked. Now, the question arose in time, when did the Olmecs, led or helped come over by this deity, when did they come to Mesoamerica? So, as part of the embarrassment of admitting that Africans were there before, the Hispanics or the Aztecs, so the notion was, well, maybe around 200 AD, and then it was maybe 200 BC, and then maybe 500 BC, but all the evidence pointed out to 3000 BC, 3000, almost 5,000 years ago, which raised, of course, other questions. How could people from Africa travel across the Atlantic so long? So that was not a welcome finding. The first time I was there with the group that traveled with me in Jalapa. As you enter the museum, there's one of those colossal heads, and then there's a wall depicting the various civilizations of Mexico, of the Americas, and when they started. And as we go down the steps and I neared this wall with its depictions, I was really startled to see, and I'm pointing out at it, that it says Olmec civilization 3000 BC. And I said, well, finally somebody admits it. So that part of the wall is also gone by now. And as I mentioned, I discussed some of these things and more of them in the book devoted entirely to the Americas, the Lost Realms. Now back to the issue of 2012 and the calendar. So the key calendar that really gives time from now, those who study it and could decipher the script say that it's not 3000 BC, but it's exactly 3113, 3113 BC. They even say that day one of this calendar was someday equivalent to someday in August 3113 BC. And the way this calendar works is that there are signs, we can call them hieroglyphs or icons, whatever. And one kind of sign is the number of days, just days, which are given here. And then the other sign gives the number of another unit of days given here, and then a third one given here, and finally it ends up on some of those monuments with a unit of time called Baktun, which is equal to 144,000 days. So adding up so many Baktuns would add up to so many days, and this sign to so many days, and totaling them all, and you divide, as it's done here, into the number of days in a year at 365 and a quarter. And so you arrive at the number of days that when this monument was set up and dated, they said this monument was set up and dated so many days since day one, that the way we count it. So if you divide it by the number of years and deduct 3,113, you arrive at that the 13th Baktun will reach its culmination in 2012. So this is the basis of all the 2012 predictions. Already when I was studying the material for my book, The Lost Realms, I found that way back in the previous century, not the 21st, but previous to the 20th, in the 19th century, it was observed that while it is true that we count 365 and a quarter days in the year, this calendar, as you can see, or maybe it's not so easy to see it, but anyway, it is using the number 360 as the base of multiples, 360. So some have already said, more than 100 years ago, that the real way to understand this calendar is not to divide the number of days by 365 and a quarter, but by the way this calendar was constructed, 360. Now, if you divide the number of days by 360, you get more years, and according to that, the 13th Baktun will end or reach its culmination only in 2087 BC, not in 2012. So it's a matter of choice which way to divide the number of days, and if it's done the way that some believe, and I do too, then you arrive at 2087, which means that if you accept this way of calculating, you have, some 70 or 75 years before you go to Patagonia. There's another problem with this notion that things will come to an end, to a culmination, to a catastrophe, to whatever, when the 13th Baktun will culminate. And the problem is that that calendar did not stop using Baktuns as the final unit. After Baktuns, he had a unit called Piktun, which was a Baktun, which is based on 360, times 20. And here is another listing that shows that after the Baktun, there were units on the monuments who covered a Piktun. So there's really, with all due respect to all others, and everybody is entitled to their opinion and their understanding of events or evidence, there is nothing, in my humble opinion, to indicate that the Mayan predictions, if any, culminate with the 13th Baktun, because then we'll start a Piktun. So this leaves us with the problem of what indeed, if anything, did the Mayas or the Aztecs, what did they say or indicate? So now we have to fall back to the other two calendars, which contain more interesting clues than when the Olmecs arrived in Mesoamerica. The other two, if you recall, are called the Tzolk'in and the Hab. Now, nobody knows really the origin of those terms. Neither do I know what Tzolk'in means, except that it's a count of days. But the Hab interested me because that was an epithet or another nickname for the god, the Egyptian god, who was called Thoth in Egypt. And one of his epithets was Hab. And here is a page from a textbook about Thoth in Egypt and the various hieroglyphic names in which his name was written. And one of them was definitely Hab. So this raises an interesting, intriguing possibility that maybe the god that was renamed Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, maybe he was really the Egyptian god Thoth. And indeed, according to Egyptian records, which I discuss at length in other books, Thoth was forced by his half-brother rival, the god Ra in Egypt. He was forced to leave Egypt around 3100 BC. And if one wants to be precise, perhaps on that date, 3113 BC, when the long count calendar began. So if this is indeed a clue, there's another interesting thing, and that is in Egypt, the number 52 was considered to be the secret number of Thoth, that it is the number of weeks, 7-day weeks in the year, is not a coincidence, but I won't spend time on that. But this secret number was 52. And these two other calendars, the Tzolkin and the Hab, that mesh together and turn around, come back to the same spot once every 52 years, as if they were designed or in some other way connected with this god Thoth, Quetzalcoatl. The Mayas called him Kukulkan, which means the same thing, the plumed or the winged serpent. Now, this thing, this 52 years cycle, which is called the bundle, the Mayas called it the bundle, played a role in the history of Mesoamerica, because this god, Quetzalcoatl, alias Thoth, who gave the civilization, the Olmec and the others in Mesoamerica, left. He definitely, the records say that he left. But before he left, he said, I will be back. I will be back precisely on the first day of the bundle when the cycle completes 52 years. He just didn't say after how many cycles. So in 1519 AD, the Aztec king Montezuma got word that a bearded god, a white bearded god, the way I showed you depicted, has returned, and 1519 AD, as we counted, was exactly the day a bundle year. So Montezuma made the mistake of assuming that the god has returned, took all the precious objects, including a golden calendar, because this was the god's creation, and presented it to him, and that was the beginning of the end of the Aztecs and the conquest of America by the Spaniards, by the conquistadors. Now I found in one of my many trips to Mexico and going to smaller and regional museums, I found this depiction on a monument, a Mayan monument, by the way, showing a Mayan chieftain lying prostrate, or whatever this position means, hearing or being told goodbye, I don't know what, but this sign in Mayan hieroglyphics means speaking. This plumed god, the winged god, is saying to the Mayan chieftain, let's say, something that has to do with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 planets. So one can say, without any certainty beyond speculation, that this god, the plumed serpent, says to the Mayan, arrivederci, I'm going back to the 10th planet, but I'll be back. And this, I think, is a very impressive and crucial piece of evidence. Now, so who were not just who was Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, but who were in general the Mayan, the Aztec gods? Now, if you go to various places in Mexico, in Guatemala, you see these depictions in temples. You see this depiction of one of the deities. Deities, again, bearded, and certainly not Mesoamerican. And I show comparisons to objects and depictions found not necessarily in Egypt, but further east in Mesopotamia. You see the comparison here, you see the comparison here. If you look at the famous Mexican pyramids, which are step pyramids, they are not smooth-sided like the Egyptian pyramids. They are more similar or entirely similar to the Sumerian and later Babylonian high-rise temples called ziggurats, which again were step pyramids. So the connection, as I have concluded, leads not just to Egypt, but to what was before Egypt, to a civilization that preceded by almost 1,000 years, 800 years at least, of the Egyptian civilization, that one of Mesopotamia. So this is a map of the Near East. This is Egypt. This is the Sinai Peninsula. This is the Middle East. This is what is now Iraq, or ancient Mesopotamia. And there, about 4,000 BC, some 6,000 years ago, there emerged suddenly, this is the term used by others, suddenly, unexpectedly, almost out of nowhere, etc., a high civilization. Now, not only that I devoted most of the book, The 12th Planet, to it, and subsequent books, but I once said that if I were awakened from my sleep and somebody would hold a gun to me and say, talk about the Sumerians, I will survive, because I can talk for hours and days about the Sumerians. But this is not the occasion for it. So I will just mention that in addition to all the firsts that are attributed to the Sumerians, the first this and the first that, etc., etc., without doubt, one of their most outstanding legacies is the introduction of writing. And this is an example of Sumerian writing called cuneiform, because it was done with the stylus on a tablet, clay tablet that was still wet, and then it dried, sometimes was dried in the kiln to become more permanent. And this is the origin of writing, without which I couldn't write my books. So the other was the cylinder seal. In a way that nobody has yet figured out. Their artists could take a stone, as often as not semi-precious, make a cylinder out of it, carving it in reverse as a negative, the image or the writing or whatever they wanted to depict. And when this was rolled on wet clay, like a rotary press, the positive image was seen, was embedded on the wet clay, and again became permanent. Now, how they did it to this day, nobody has figured out. But this is one way in which we have not only text from antiquity due to the writing, but also the way we have pictorial evidence from antiquity. And unlike the Mayas and their primitive astronomy, one of the Sumerian achievements was a very sophisticated astronomy. They described planets that we have discovered only in the past 200 years or so after the introduction of the telescope. They depicted not only listed those planets, but they described them. And in my book, The 12th Planet, I give Sumerian descriptions of the planets that our spacecraft, the Pioneer spacecraft, visited only in a few decades ago. And I said, according to the Sumerians, Neptune looks this way, Uranus looks that way. They explained the odd orbit of Pluto, and so on. And one of the cylinder seals that I have come upon, looking at seals or their imprints of thousands and thousands of them, was this one, which has since been visited and looked at by thousands of people in the museum in Berlin. It is known as cylinder seal VA243. It's supposedly a mythological depiction of a god, because the gods are a myth, they never existed, granting the plow to mankind. And as many other seals, the god is named, by the way, there were ornaments of celestial objects. And when I looked at this one, I said, this looks to me like a solar system. And this is what is without the arrow. This is what is depicted on the cylinder seal up here. And this, first of all, shows a star, the sun, and not the earth in the center, as the ancients were supposed ignorantly to believe that the earth is the center of the universe. So this is a star, the sun, surrounded by planets. And if you compare this depiction to the way we would depict planets orbiting our sun, you see that the location and the sizes are match each other, with one great exception, that between Mars and Jupiter, the Sumerians depicted one more relatively large planet that of whose existence we are. Not really, but we are supposed not to know. And this count, by the way, this count of 10 objects circling, orbiting the sun, plus the moon, making a total of 12, hence the title of my first book, The 12th Planet. It should really have been the 10th planet, which is the 12th member of the solar system. So when the publisher considered publishing my first book, he says to me, forget it, it's too long, it's the 12th planet. So it's the 10th planet, which is called the 12th planet. So here, on many monuments, and I showed only one example, is again all those, the sun, the moon, all the other planets, plus this one, which is sometimes depicted by a winged disk, this mysterious planet. Now, did such a planet exist? Was it really affect, at least in antiquity? And the Sumerians, dedicated to writing as they were, indeed left behind tales on clay tablets. And one of them is called the Epic of Creation, which tells the story of how that one more planet happened to join the solar system. And the Epic of Creation describes the systematic or step-by-step coming into being of the planets around the sun. I said there was an olden planet called Tiamat, and then there were two planets that came into being between Tiamat and the sun, which we now call Mercury and Venus. And then other planets came into being, always like two at a time. And into that solar system, at some point, an upheaval took place because a planet that belonged to another solar system and was somehow thrust out of it was passing by our solar system, and the gravitational pull of those planets that did exist in the solar system started to attract it and change its course from this way. This is all a diagram, of course. This way, more inwards, and finally into a collision with this olden planet Tiamat. And the collision had to occur because while all the planets in the solar system that coalesced, science, modern science believes, out of a cloud of dust, orbit in this one direction, counterclockwise. But this invader, this stranger, came and it is orbiting clockwise. So the collision was really unavoidable. The text referred to it as a celestial battle. I deal in the book The 12th Planet, and then in another book titled Genesis Revisited, step by step, and explain scientifically what ancient words mean. But there were then a series of collisions. This planet, the invader, whom the Babylonians renamed Marduk in honor of their national god, had developed moons or satellites. Tiamat also had a host led by a large moon called Kingu. There was a series of collisions, and finally, in the final collision, Tiamat was split in two. One part was totally smashed to bits and pieces and became an orbiting band, which we call the asteroid belt. And by the way, the Sumerian explanation of the origin of the asteroid belt is the only available explanation, because modern science has no explanation for it. And the other half, more or less intact, but only half a planet, was shunted to a new orbit, plus the largest moon of Tiamat, and became our planet Earth, and became the planet Earth. And if you look at the way our planet really looks, you see that there is this huge cavity, which we call the Pacific Ocean, and the continents have spread out, and from half a planet we have now a round planet, partly rounded by water. Okay, we are back in business, I hope. All right, so the question is, once that collision had taken place, the Earth was created with its moon, what happened to the invader? According to all those texts, the invader became a permanent member of our solar system with a great elliptical orbit coming back to our vicinity once every 3,600 years, give or take. And that is so this is how, according to the Sumerian epic of creation, the planet, so-called planet X, the 10th planet, the 12th planet, the Sumerians called it Nibiru, which meant planet of the crossing. That when it reaches the proximity of Earth and reaches its point of perigee, the closest to the sun, they called it the crossing. And indeed, very often, when it neared the Earth, the symbol for that planet changed from a winged disk to a cross. And on some of the slides that I was going to show to you. Around 1000 BC, the symbol of the cross began to appear, replacing the symbol of the winged disc. And the reason was that that planet, Nibiru, was nearing Earth, and the time, the moment of crossing was nearing, was expected. I had a whole slew of slides to show you with ancient evidence, with quotes even from the Bible, from various prophets, Isaiah, Amos, and others, that started around that time, 800 BC, 750 BC, to speak about the nearing day of the Lord. The reference was to a celestial Lord, a planet considered a god by the Babylonians. As time went on, 800 BC, 750 BC, 700, 650, and I had the whole sequence for you, quoting this prophet and that prophet in the Bible. The prophecies about the coming day of the Lord became more and more imminent. It's coming, it will show up from the south, the skies will darken when it appears, there'll be some other upheavals, and so on. Similarly, there were the same kind of predictions, and I illustrated them both with the text and with diagrams in the Babylonian and Assyrian tablets and other depictions. There were actually records of astronomical observations from that time saying that the planet is nearing, the planet is appearing, the planet is seen reddish, glowing, etc., etc., etc. And finally, the day of the Lord took place. It took place exactly in 556 BC, and it is remembered in ancient records as an unusual and unexpected solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, and the shadow passed precisely over a certain place called Haran, which played an important role in those events. Again, I regret that I cannot show you the evidence for it, but it's all in my book. It's all in my book, The Lost Book of Enki. It's all in the book, The End of Days. So you can read about it to some extent, although not all the pictorial evidence is there. So what it amounts to is the biblical prophecies that are usually taken as one body of prophecy. This and this will happen. Were actually separated by me, literally, the way I challenged the teacher when I was a schoolboy about the precise meaning of the word in the Bible, that if you follow the biblical prophecies, precisely what does it say and what does it mean, you see that it was split and divided into two separate phenomena. One was the day of the Lord, which was the return of the planet, which I suggest did take place in 556 BC. Now, if the orbit of the planet is roughly, and I explain in the book, The End of Days, why it's roughly, if it's roughly 3,600 years, so the next nearing of the planet, if you deduct 556 from about 3,600, you're talking about the 29th century AD. So if those who are afraid or create great concerns about the Mayan calendar and the year 2012, which, as I explained before, is iffy, even if you accept the Mayan and the Mesoamerican calendars. Maybe it's 2087 AD, not 2012. Then if they are linked, as most of them are, to the return of the planet Nibiru, planet X, the planet of the gods, the planet of the Anunnaki, if that is what is intimated, then it is baseless. The planet will not return in this century, neither in 2012 nor in 2087. But there are those prophecies. There is the promise of Quetzalcoatl, who said, I will be back. So what we should expect, ladies and gentlemen, is not the imminent return of the planet. We should expect the return of the gods, of the Anunnaki, as the Sumerians called them. And therefore, the question is, first of all, if, because not everybody has to accept the biblical prophecies as valid, and not everybody does. But if we accept the biblical prophecies as our guides, and if we compare the biblical prophecies with past events, and everything that was prophesied by Jeremiah, by Isaiah, by Ezekiel, etc., about their days, did take place. So I am inclined to accept the veracity of the Bible also in this respect, and say that there will be a return of the gods. The question is then, when? Now, this is not a new question, because the last book, apart from the Chronicles, the last book in the Bible, in the Old Testament, is the book of Daniel, and it deals with this very same question. Daniel has spent his days and his encounters with angelic beings, etc., by keeping asking them, when? And he got various answers, most of them, or all of them, very enigmatic. And then to the last day, the last page of the book of Daniel, it's still a question. He didn't know, and it ends up with saying, the enigma, the mystery is still there. But the clearest answer of several that he got was that the end of days, we have left behind the day of the Lord, and we are now dealing with the end of days, which is how I started discussing this Mayan calendar business. The end of days will occur, Daniel was told, after times and a half, which didn't do him much good, because he didn't understand what it means, which time, what does times and a half mean, etc. Now, one of those that spent most of his time and most of his life, I could say, trying to decipher this enigma, when will the end of days take place, whether this signifies the return of the gods or some other cataclysmic or other events, was Sir Isaac Newton. He is mostly known for his calculations of orbits, etc., but he left behind pages and volumes of handwritten manuscripts dealing with this issue. What does times and a half mean? And it so happened that about 2 years ago, this whole collection of Sir Isaac Newton manuscripts ended up in Jerusalem at one of the libraries there, donated by some benefactor who bought the whole collection of Newton manuscripts. And that included a page, one page written on both sides in ink, this way and this way, where his final calculations were given. And I found out about it because the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, in a program about Sir Isaac Newton on some anniversary, I don't recall which, his birth, his death, or 200 years or 250 years, mentioned at the very end that before he died, Sir Isaac Newton calculated the end of days to take place in 2160 AD. Pretty soon. So I succeeded in tracking down that page and was given a facsimile, Xerox or whatever of it, on both sides. And as I studied it, the front and the back, I realized what he was after. 2160 sounded to me like a familiar figure. And among the slides that you will not see this evening were several dealing with the zodiac. One of the inventions, or first, with which the Sumerians are credited, but they really got it from the Anunnaki, is zodiacal time. You can imagine that when the Anunnaki, coming from a planet where 1 year equals 3,600 of hours, because what is a year? One orbit around the sun. They come from their planet and land on this planet and say what kind of a crazy place it is. You know, it runs like crazy around the sun. You know, before it's sunrise, it's already sunset. So so they needed. I have suggested some kind of a median, some kind of a way to coordinate the time that Earth moves around the sun with the time that their planet moves around the sun. And it so happens that due to a phenomenon called precession, which is the name for a phenomenon, that as the Earth goes around the sun, after a year, the 365 and a quarter and all that business days, it does not come back to precisely the spot from which it started. There is a slight retardation. The retardation accumulates, amounts to 1 degree of 360 in 72 years, and therefore, if the Anunnaki created a zodiac of 12 constellations, in antiquity they were called houses or stations, so each 12th was 30 degrees, so 30 times 72 is 2,160. And when I saw that page by Sir Isaac Newton, I said, that's what he was after. He was calculating zodiacal time. That was the time the Anunnaki devised to mesh, like those two wheels, between their planet and our planet and its orbit around the sun. So this zodiacal time. So the key to answering the question, If they will return, as I believe they will, if they will return, and the question then is when, which is like asking when is the end of days, according to the book of Daniel, etc. That's what he was told. Time, our time, zodiacal time, not your time, our time. One zodiacal period, two zodiacal, or whatever. So I was included several slides that show you that there are all kinds of indications which I interpreted and I believe indicate that the end of days and the return will take place during the zodiacal age of Pisces. This is our age until the end of this century. So whether you say the Mayan calendar calculated one way is 2087. If you say when is the meshing, what they call the bundle, every 52 years, if you add 52 years to AD 5019, when Cortez landed, you arrive at the next one at 2097 AD. If you take the zodiacal ages, you arrive at the latest 2100 AD. So this, I suggest, is when the end of days will occur. Thank you.